Your brain is roughly 300,000 years old. The world you're using it in is about 100 years old. And that gap, between the ancient machine and the modern environment it's been dropped into, is the source of almost every psychological struggle you've never quite been able to explain. Not the anxiety that spikes when you check your phone at night. Not the restlessness that hits when nothing is happening. Not the loneliness you feel surrounded by more people, virtually, than any human being in history has ever been surrounded by. Not the exhaustion that follows a day in which you did nothing physically demanding whatsoever. These aren't character flaws. They're error messages. Your brain running ancient software in an environment it was never designed to handle. This is the story of that mismatch. What your brain was built for. What it's actually facing, and why the gap between those two things is making an entire civilization quietly unravel, in ways we keep calling personal problems, when they are in fact structural ones. Let's start at the beginning. The real beginning. For approximately 95% of human evolutionary history, your ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers. Small bands of 20 to 50 people. Known relationships. Physical movement through varied landscape for 8 to 10 hours a day. Food that required effort, tracking, hunting, gathering, processing. Sleep governed entirely by the natural light cycle. Social life conducted entirely face-to-face, with people you had known your whole life, whose emotional states you could read in real time, whose reliability you could assess directly. Danger was occasional, acute, and real. A predator, a rival group, a harsh winter. When the danger passed, the stress response passed with it. And then there was rest. This is the environment your brain evolved to navigate. Not as a compromise, as an optimal fit. Every system in your brain, the threat detection, the reward processing, the social bonding, the sleep regulation, the attention architecture, was calibrated by millions of years of natural selection to function well in exactly this context. Not perfectly, but well enough to survive, reproduce, and maintain a baseline of psychological stability. Researchers studying the Kaluli people of Papua New Guinea, one of the few remaining populations living in conditions closest to our ancestral environment, found that clinical depression was present in roughly 1 in 2,000 individuals. According to research cited by Columbia University's Department of Psychiatry, the prevalence of clinical depression in industrialized nations runs at over 5% of the population. That's a factor of 100. The same human brain, the same genetics, producing radically different mental health outcomes, depending entirely on the environment it's operating in. That is not a small difference. That is the signal. Now let's look at what that ancient brain is actually facing. The first collision is with the attention economy, and it starts the moment you wake up. Your brain's attention system evolved to detect novelty and threat in a physical environment that changed slowly. The rustle in the grass, the darkening of the sky, the unfamiliar face at the edge of the clearing. Each of these signals was worth attending to, because in the ancestral environment, novel or threatening stimuli were often genuinely important for survival. The brain developed a strong bias toward them, a hair trigger that scanned constantly for anything new or potentially dangerous and snapped focus toward it automatically, regardless of what you were previously concentrating on. That system is still running, in you, right now. And every digital interface you use has been specifically engineered by teams of behavioral psychologists and neuroscientists to exploit it. The infinite scroll was not designed to be convenient. It was designed to be endless. Because an ending would allow your brain to disengage, to make a completion assessment, to decide that it had seen enough. Remove the ending, and the threat detection system has no signal to stand down. It keeps scanning. The notification badge triggers the same novelty response your ancestor felt when something moved in the peripheral vision. The red dot means something changed, something new, something potentially important. Your brain cannot distinguish between a rustle in the grass that might be a predator and a red badge on an app that tells you someone liked a photograph. Both activate the same neural machinery. One of them mattered, the other one doesn't. But your ancient brain doesn't know which is which. According to research published in the journal Behavioral Sciences, modern environments inundate individuals with artificial sensory and cognitive stimulation, from fluorescent lighting and dense traffic to digital screens and on-demand entertainment, producing concentration difficulties, anxiety, and sleep disturbances. Activities that overactivate the brain's reward circuitry produce compulsive behaviors and addiction. And because individuals evaluate incoming stimuli relative to prior experience, thresholds for satisfaction continually rise. The more stimulation your brain receives, the more stimulation it requires to register as adequate. The environment is running an arms race against your own attention system, and the environment has a larger research budget than you do. The second collision is with the stress response. Your fight-or-flight system, the rapid hormonal cascade that floods your body with cortisol and adrenaline when threat is detected, was designed for acute situations. A real physical danger appears, the system activates, your heart rate rises, your attention narrows, your muscles prime for action. You respond. The threat resolves, the system deactivates. Your body returns to baseline, usually within 20 to 30 minutes. This is a beautifully effective emergency response, but it requires two things to work correctly. First, that the threat be real and physical. Second, that it end. Modern life provides neither condition. The threats your stress system is activating for, a difficult email from your boss, a contentious comment thread, financial worry, a news cycle of cascading catastrophes, social comparison with the curated highlight reel of every person you know, are not physical. They don't end when you run or fight. They're abstract, chronic, and ambient. The cortisol releases. The adrenaline fires. And then there's nowhere to go. Nothing to fight. Nothing to run from. The stress response that was designed to save your life in 30 seconds is now running continuously in response to stimuli that never resolve, never physically endanger you, and never send the all-clear signal. Chronic cortisol elevation does specific, measurable damage. It suppresses immune function. It disrupts sleep by preventing the body from reaching the low cortisol levels required for deep rest. It shrinks the hippocampus, the brain's primary memory structure, with prolonged exposure. It elevates inflammation throughout the body, which has been linked to depression, cardiovascular disease, and accelerated cognitive aging. According to the CDC's own data, between 20 and 30% of working American adults are chronically sleep-deprived. Screen light at night suppresses melatonin production by approximately 23%, according to sleep research literature, pushing the brain's sleep onset later into the night, while work schedules pull the alarm clock earlier into the morning. The result is a population running a chronic sleep deficit, with chronically elevated cortisol, in a state of permanent mild stress that the body was designed to sustain for minutes and is instead sustaining for decades. This is not burnout. This is a biological system operating outside its design parameters, continuously. The third collision is the most fundamental of all, the collapse of genuine social connection. Your brain is a social organ, not metaphorically, at the neurological level. Robin Dunbar, the British anthropologist and evolutionary psychologist, spent decades studying the relationship between brain size and social group size across primate species. His conclusion, now called Dunbar's number, was that the human neocortex is sized to manage approximately 150 stable social relationships. Not 150 acquaintances, 150 people whose emotional states and motivations you can track, whose reliability you can assess, whose presence in your life you can meaningfully maintain. This is the social environment your brain was built for. And inside that group, it functions extraordinarily well. Face-to-face, physically present, reading micro-expressions and tone of voice and body language in real time with a precision that no digital communication comes close to matching. What does that brain have now? In May 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, issued an 82-page advisory describing what he called an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. Its findings were striking. Approximately 1 in 2 American adults reported feeling lonely, a rate that had been rising for decades before the COVID-19 pandemic and accelerated sharply during it. Social isolation, according to the advisory, increases the risk of premature death by 29%. To give that number context, that risk is comparable, according to the report, to the health impact of smoking 15 cigarettes per day. Loneliness was assessed as more widespread than smoking, diabetes, or anxiety as a public health challenge in the United States. This is happening in the most connected moment in human history. In a world where you can contact virtually anyone on Earth within seconds, where the average person has access to more social stimulation, more messages, more posts, more content from more people than any human being who has ever lived. And more people are lonely than at almost any point in recorded history. The paradox resolves when you understand what the brain actually needs from social connection. It needs the physical, the in-person presence, the non-verbal communication, the shared activity, the sustained attention of another person who is fully present. These experiences release oxytocin, the neuropeptide that regulates stress, builds trust, and creates the neurochemical foundation of genuine social bonding. Research cited in the Surgeon General's report found that people who used social media for 2 or more hours per day were more than twice as likely to report feeling socially isolated compared to those who used it for less than 30 minutes daily. The more digital social activity, the more loneliness, not despite the social activity. Because of the substitution effect, because time spent in digital interaction is time not spent in physical interaction, and the brain is able to register the difference even when the conscious mind cannot. Your brain is sitting inside a network of 7 billion people and starving for the 25 it was designed to know well. The fourth collision is with time itself, specifically with the obliteration of boredom. This one is underrated. In the ancestral environment, there were hours every day with no particular demand on attention. Walking, waiting, sitting by a fire. These periods of low stimulation were not wasted time. They were when the brain consolidated memories, processed emotional experience, generated creative connections, and rehearsed social scenarios. Neuroscientists call the brain state associated with this the default mode network, the same network we discussed in previous work. The DMN activates during rest, during mind wandering, during the absence of external demands. It's one of the most metabolically active states in the brain. It does critical work. It requires space to do it. Modern life has nearly eliminated that space. Every transition, every wait, every moment of potential stillness has been filled. The phone comes out in the elevator. The podcast plays on the commute. The show runs while dinner is being made. The notifications fill the gaps between tasks. The average American adult, according to various estimates, spends between 7 and 10 hours per day consuming digital media. The DMN never gets the uninterrupted time it was designed to use. Memory consolidation suffers. Emotional processing is deferred. Creative thought is crowded out by the feed. And the brain, denied its natural rest cycles, develops a tolerance for stimulation that makes genuine rest increasingly uncomfortable. Boredom, which was once a signal that pointed toward imagination, now feels intolerable because the bar for stimulation has been raised so high that anything below it registers as deprivation. You're not addicted to your phone. You're a brain that was designed for firelit evenings and open landscape, encountering an infinite supply of exactly the kind of novelty your threat detection system was built to prioritize, and having no biological mechanism to make it stop. The fifth collision is with hyperpalatable food, and it's the one that's most visually obvious in the population. Your ancestors' food acquisition required effort, sustained physical effort. Hunting, gathering, carrying, preparing. The caloric input was preceded by significant caloric expenditure, and the foods available were nutritionally dense, but not engineered for maximum palatability. The dopamine release from food was calibrated to the actual reward value of the food. Real hunger, real effort, real nutrition, real satisfaction. Food science has spent the last century reverse engineering your brain's pleasure response. The perfect combination of salt, fat, and sugar, described by food scientist Howard Moskowitz as the bliss point, was identified through systematic testing and is now engineered into virtually every mass-produced food product to maximize the dopamine spike and minimize the satiety signal. Your brain gets the reward response without the hunger, without the effort, without the nutritional value that the reward response was designed to signal. The system is being told one thing while receiving another, and it responds, across a population, with exactly the outcomes you'd predict from a reward system that's being systematically overloaded. Now step back and look at all 5 of these collisions simultaneously. You have a brain whose attention system is being hijacked by interfaces designed by behavioral scientists to keep it perpetually activated, whose stress response is running chronically against ambient, irresolvable modern threats, whose social bonding system is starving for physical presence while drowning in digital interaction, whose rest and processing cycles are being systematically crowded out by an entertainment infrastructure that fills every available moment, and whose food reward system is being exploited by an industry that has industrialized the engineering of bliss. Every one of these systems was functioning adequately, some of them extraordinarily well, for most of human history. None of them are broken. They're all doing exactly what they were designed to do, in an environment they were not designed to face. This is what evolutionary psychiatry calls evolutionary mismatch. The rate of cultural and technological change has vastly outpaced the rate of genetic and neurological adaptation. According to Columbia University's Department of Psychiatry, our genetics and brain development have lagged as human culture evolved at a staggering pace, creating a discrepancy between the traits that were once adaptive and those that now impede functioning in modern society. We are, in the blunt words of the research, running Paleolithic hardware in a digital world. The consequences are not subtle. 1 in 5 adults globally meets clinical criteria for an anxiety disorder. Clinical depression affects more than 280 million people worldwide, according to the World Health Organization. Attention difficulties have reached levels that have prompted serious scientific debate about whether ADHD represents a disorder or simply an ancestral trait. Novelty-seeking, rapid environment switching, hypervigilance to external stimuli that was adaptive in the hunter-gatherer context and is maladaptive in a modern classroom or open-plan office. Sleep deprivation is now a public health crisis affecting between 1/5 and 1/3 of working adults in developed nations, according to CDC data. These are not individual failures. They are system-level outcomes. Predictable from the mismatch, visible in the aggregate, explicable by the gap between what the brain evolved to handle and what it's actually facing. So what do you do with this? The answer isn't to abandon modernity. It isn't to pretend that the trade-offs of modern life are entirely negative. They're not. The same world that produces chronic stress and digital addiction also produces antibiotics, running water, and the ability to speak to someone on the other side of the planet. These are not nothing. These are extraordinary. The answer is something more subtle and more demanding. It's to understand that the defaults of modern life are not neutral. They're calibrated by commercial interests, by technological architecture, by economic systems, to extract maximum engagement from brains that were never designed to resist them, and that operating well in this environment requires deliberate design, not deprivation, design. Physical movement that approximates the activity patterns your body evolved expecting. Sleep protected from the light exposure that disrupts your circadian system. Social investment in the physical, in-person relationships that release the neurochemicals your bonding system requires. Structured periods of deliberate boredom, of unstimulated time, that allow the DMN to do the work that no amount of content consumption can replace. Attention to the food environment you're operating in, not as moral discipline, but as recognition that the pleasure signals your brain is receiving were engineered by people who profit from overriding your satiety response. None of this is complicated in principle. All of it is difficult in practice, because the environment you'd be designing against has been optimized by people with enormous resources to make the defaults as frictionless as possible. The path of least resistance leads directly into the mismatch. The path out requires friction. Deliberate, sustained, consistent friction. And knowing why the friction is necessary, knowing that you're not fighting weakness or failure or lack of discipline, but a genuine collision between ancient biology and modern infrastructure, changes what the effort feels like. It stops being self-improvement and starts being something more accurate. Adaptation. A brain built for one world, making the deliberate effort to survive and function well in another. Your brain is 300,000 years old. The world you're navigating is about 100 years old. That gap isn't going to close anytime soon. But understanding it, clearly, honestly, without self-blame, is the only starting point that actually works.